welcome. This is an annual event that we started a couple of years ago for Autism Awareness Month, which is April, and we try to find one day during the month to have a special public lecture here at NIH that's sponsored by the Interagency Autism Coordinating Committee and the National Institute of Mental Health. And this year, delighted to be able to do this today, which is both the day before National DNA Day and 2 days before Arbor Day, but most importantly, the day of having both Earth Day and Bring Your Child to Work Day on campus. So welcome to families who are here. We're delighted to have you. And my charge is to just very briefly introduce our speaker, who is Ron Suskind, who I don't think many of you will know, although he is a former resident of D.C., and you will know many of the things that he's written. Ron is originally a native of Wilmington, Delaware, went to college at UVA, and then got his graduate degree in journalism at Columbia. In 1990, he joined the Wall Street Journal on the National Affairs desk and quickly rose to be a senior reporter there, and then came to national prominence in 1995. And the story is really pretty interesting. He became interested in one particular high school student at Ballou here in Washington, a young man named Cedric Jennings, who wanted to go to MIT. And this was a young guy, quite gifted from a disadvantaged background, who had this dream. And Ron followed him for a couple of years, wrote 2 articles about him that went on to win the Pulitzer Prize, and then became a book called Hope in the Unseen. And that is a book that still is used in discussions about affirmative action, which is certainly on the front page of the paper this week. And it continues now, almost 20 years later, to be one of those iconic books around the issues of what does it take to help someone climb out of poverty, even with these very deep aspirations. And what that book does, for those of you who haven't read it, is to show how very difficult that can be. After getting the Pulitzer Prize and becoming fairly famous from that book, Ron decided to start writing instead of newspaper articles. He did a series of books in 2004. The Price of Loyalty, which was the story of Treasury Secretary Paul O'Neill. And if you just think back a little bit to the early 2000s, you'll remember that he left the Bush administration with some dissonance. And so this is the story about how that happened. That was the book where I think for the first time someone suggested that we were living under a co-presidency between Mr. Cheney and Mr. Bush, something that I don't think anybody had quite understood, but The Price of Loyalty made that abundantly clear. That was followed in 2006 by The 1% Doctrine, another book about the Bush administration, but in this case, the study of Mr. Cheney and his belief that in the era of terrorism, even if there's a 1% chance of a terrorist activity, we have to handle that as a 100% event. And it was the book really about what does it mean when we take these low probability, high impact events and make them the fundamental basis of policy. So again, a very provocative but highly insightful book. 2008 brought The Way of the World, which was a series of narratives about being Muslim in the United States and being American in a Muslim country, and weaving those narratives together. 2011, one of the first books about the Obama administration and the financial crisis was a book called The Confidence Men. Has a wonderful subtitle, Wall Street, Washington, and the Education of a President. And I don't think I need to say any more about that to give you a sense of what that's about. So, after all of those really celebrated, and every one of those books was a New York Times bestseller, Ron has embarked on something very, very different. And he's here to talk to us today about the book that is just out around his own personal experience, along with that of his wife Cornelia, in raising their son, Owen, and I'm going to let him tell the story. This is entitled Autism's Powerful Affinities, Prison or Pathway, but I think what you'll hear from the story that he tells is something very similar to what's come up whether it's talking about the Bush administration or the Obama administration or the problems of breaking out of an impoverished environment, that Ron has almost an extraordinary and almost unique way of looking at a complex situation and finding a sort of a silver lining or finding a way forward that is both insightful, compassionate, and incredibly hopeful. So I'm just delighted to have you here. I can't imagine a better person for this year's Autism Awareness Lecture, and I hope that you'll join me in welcoming Ron Suskind.
All right. Well, that was lovely. And at least half of that was true. I'm sure of half of it. I hear things like that, and a little voice I hear behind my ear, and still a disappointment to his mother. You know, she wanted better. Tom, I'm thinking maybe you too. You know, a professional. That's what she wanted. You know. I mean, I joke around about that, you know, but the fact is that part of my journey and the journey of my family is a collision of worldviews. And each of us arrives with one as a child, usually from a parent. In my case, my mother, especially. You know, we joke around. She pretty much laid it out for me when I was quite small. She's from Brooklyn, about this big. No surprise looking at me. More or less, I won't love you any less if you're not a success. I just won't mention your name to other people, just so you know. It's good she told me. And it's easy to do shtick about that. But, you know, it gets to the heart of the parent-child relationship, which was fundamentally altered in our case, in a shocker, in a surprise, in a reversal, in our world going upside down. And what's interesting, as Tom talks about all those books, is that behind the curtain of all of that, driving it, we now recognize, and I think we did a bit by bit along the way, was what was happening inside of our house. And that's not something we really talked about. We didn't talk about it in the way a lot of people don't talk about where we live and our hearts live, often drive our lives out in the world of sunlight. But that's really what happened. This is what happened behind that curtain. You know, we look back, my wife and I, Cornelia, who of course was my partner in making this book, at those people who arrived in Washington 20 years ago from Boston. I came down here to be the national affairs reporter for the Wall Street Journal. It was a very exciting time. We had 2 kids, Walter, our older son, 5, and Owen, our younger son, about 4 months shy of 3, 2 and 2/3, 3/4. And, you know, we're full of the kind of ebullience that is prized. Young family on the move. This was a great job in a great town. You know, I had to kill 10 people to get the job, mostly family men, nice guys. And I was just pumped. And we were pumped. Dreams coming true. You know, you make plans and God laughs, and he, on this day, had something in store for us. We arrive here, and we see that our very able, engaging, 2.5, almost 3-year-old Owen seems to be very uncomfortable. He's disconsolate. He's crying a lot. He seems to actually be sort of out of balance, which we're saying, what is that about? He must be doing some kind of game where he's running with his eyes closed. And then, in the hubbub of boxes being unpacked and a new job, we realize he is losing speech. Now, he had a full complement at 2.5. You know, 100, 200, 300 words. I love you guys. Let's get ice cream. Where are my Ninja Turtles? even some little jokes he could tell. Age appropriate, at least it seemed. Now, we weren't looking maybe as closely as we might have, no doubt, because everything seemed fine, and his doctors thought everything was fine. He was hitting all of his markers, all of his benchmarks, just like every pediatrician says. But after a couple months in Washington, he was down to one word, juice. Only word, one word. And you know, he didn't even want the juice much of the time. You know, he had graduated to the big boy cup about 1.5, almost a year and a half before. But now he needed the sippy cup. And off we went into a land of really of terror, of fear. Now the fact is that we know now things we didn't know then. That was a long time ago. That's 20 years ago. And every step of the way, we not only live the life of our family, but we live in a country. We live in a planet that is growing in acuity, understanding, poking, searching, finding. But back then, who knew? And so a few months later, we sit with the developmental specialist who sits us down after a couple tests with Owen, and she says, okay, this is called autism. Now, what do we know? We know Rain Man. Everyone saw the movie. You have a movie like that, everyone watches it, and that's public education. I know Rain Man. The idea that Owen could be that guy, Raymond Babbitt, well, that's impossible. So at least what we felt. You know, those two people sitting in that chair, Cornelia and me side by side, when we hear that word, I mean, I can see them now like it was last Tuesday, frozen. Neither of us were breathing then at that moment. And we are floating up near the drop ceiling, right about that, looking down on them. Because in some way, those people, the people who came to Washington, were in those chairs. And they start to vanish at that moment. The woman, lovely woman, who was the doctor, you know, we had to turn her into a villain. I feel terrible about this. Because we needed to distance ourselves from her. So we called her the Ice Queen. Because it was like ice went into our veins. Someone had to do that. I mean, we were terribly unfair to her. But we needed to do that. And we needed to embrace, at that first moment, denial. We're living it. An old psychiatrist friend of mine, the father of my best buddy, later on says to me, you know, Ron, he's a Cuban Jew. No. It's a whole community of them. So he says, Ron. There was something going on. He says, let me tell you. Denial. Respect denial. He's a psychiatrist. Treated people for 50 years, sitting on the couches. Denial is very powerful. When people cannot cope, this is the place they must go. I didn't respect it. I didn't even see it. We wouldn't use the A word because we felt it loaded stigma onto our son, and it was going to work out fine. He was going to be okay. Not long after that, I was talking to another doctor who was not an ice queen or king, started to reach out to us, and he says to me, he's like, so what is it you do for a living? I said, me? I'm a newspaper reporter. He's like, oh, I'm so sorry to hear that. I said, really, why? Are you pretty good with numbers? I said, no, Mets. Private equity, that's a nice way to go. Investment banking. I'm like, what are you telling me? You're going to have to support him probably for the next 50 years and for 30 years after you're dead. You know, have you considered a career change? I said, no, this is the only thing I can do. Okay, good luck. The new people that were forming, and it's not just Cornelia and me, it's also our older son, Walter. We're learning hard-won lessons, little by little, often against our will. We can see it now. We couldn't see it then. Then we just live day to day, feeling our way forward, mostly eyes shut. What begins at this point is a 20-year battle. Embrace, struggle, dodge and fake with affinity. Affinity. That's a word we use. We settled on it later. There are other ones. Passion, interest, bliss, obsession. That last one's loaded. You know the definition. An interest so powerful, it is to the exclusion of all else. Unhealthy. Wheel in the ditch. Pathology. All those words we worked with. Because from this moment, a year in to Owen's silence, because he loses speech, he just has his one word, we see he seems to like only one thing. The Disney animated movies that he loved before the autism's onset. Now, the fact is that being a kid that age, they all watch Disney. Again, part of the idea, how do you draw the line between passion and obsession? Well, my older son, Walter, was passionate about Disney. We watched them all together. You know the movies. I've seen some people of the right age here. Little Mermaid, Beauty and the Beast, Aladdin, Lion King. I see some Ariels here. Ariel, was that you? Which was your person? Yeah. Enormously formative. And that's why people love and hate and get crazy about Disney. It's like they're loading in cultural codes when the little munchkins don't even know what hit them. And what am I supposed to be like or not? Who am I in that movie? Little people. Well, we watched them together like a lot of parents did. These are not just movies. These are the biggest movies of the year in those years. 89, 90, 91, 92, 93. Walter, our older son, was Gaston from The Beauty and the Beast. You know, why wouldn't he be? He's handsome, he's popular, he leads people with torches. 5. This is 5-year-old heaven. That's when he was embracing Gaston so powerfully. At one point we said, this has to stop. This is before the onset of autism. We lived in Boston. We put the TV in the closet, cut it off. But Walter didn't seem to mind. He was like, okay, why? He just watched at friends' houses. They all had them. But then in Washington, we see Owen watching the videos. We're living in Georgetown. It's a 3rd floor bedroom. It's the only thing that seems to give him comfort. He's up all night. He's thrashing. He's miserable. He's silent. But somehow sitting watching those movies, The Little Mermaid, that was his chosen movie in that year, he just seemed to be settled, comfortable. We talked to the doctors. We already had a great team, and we were very lucky, and it's great we lived around here. Dr. Alan Rosenblatt, who's now in Illinois, great developmental pediatrician. Eventually we find C.T. Gordon, the psychiatrist. OT, we had Dan Griffin. Great clinicians, great practitioners in this area. We say, what's up? Is this bad for him to be watching this stuff all the time? Well, Cornelia's scheduling him what? Yes, just a few hours a day. Well, is he comfortable? Yes. Is he joyful? Yeah. It's okay. A year passes. This is the only thing we can do as a family, is watch these videos. So the 4 of us watch them together. And on a particular day, we are watching The Little Mermaid, as is our way, and Owen has been murmuring a word for a couple weeks. Juicervos, juicervos, juicervos. Now, this is gibberish that is like a baby says. Baby talk. There's no meaning to us. But then we're watching the movie, and he's rewinding a part. Every time he rewinds, Walter says, Owen, stop rewinding. Just watch the movie. Rewind. What part? Cornelia and I barely notice. We're chatting with each other on the bed. We have a lot to catch up on. It's where Ursula, the sea witch, that's Pat Carroll, says to Ariel, our heroine, if you want to be human, it won't cost much, a trifle really, just your voice. Rewind. Again, rewind. Until Cornelia goes, it's not juice. I said, it's not juice. It's just. Of course, I grab Owen and I go, just your voice. And he goes, juice or rose, juice or rose, juice or rose. Walter starts jumping up and down. Owen's talking again. It was what we called our Annie Sullivan moment. Then we saw our trusted pediatrician. He's like, oh, here, sit down again. Okay. At the onset of autism, his auditory processing probably went haywire. That's very common. He probably doesn't understand what any of those sounds mean. You know, he may never get his speech back again. We know that. We've heard that. So it's called echolalia. I'm like, is that what it sounds like? He's a echo, like a parrot. Well, look, it shows he may want to engage. That's a good thing. It's the beginning. Now, I'll run through the story, boom, 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 quick, 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 so we can get to some of the goods, the yield of this 20-year experiment. So as I jump lily pads, I'll jump ahead to when he's 6.5. Now, we're doing everything under the sun, every speech, OT, play therapy, you name it, we're doing it. He's built very modest speech capabilities at this point. 3-word sentences. I want juice. That's it. So at least he can say that, and that's good, and we're hopeful about that. But at 6.5, of course, that's light years behind where you'd hope he might be. We still had feelings about might. Soon they would be surgically removed from us, but at that point, we still felt them. So, let's bring in another character into this drama. There are 4 people in this. Owen is at the center. He drives the story, but you have a mother, a father, and a brother. Now, I'll just say broadly, as I'll throw in these sort of broad concepts, bit by bit, I think the sibling issue is one of the least understood and least recognized issues here, this little planet we live in. Autism nation, whatever you want to call it. Sometimes Autism nation feels like the Balkans, frankly, Bosnia. But nonetheless, siblings. For every one of those kids, there are 1, 2, 3 siblings sometimes. They not only are often the only almost same age neurotypical person that the child has a relationship with, but they will be together on the life journey going forward. And, as Kevin Pelfrey at Yale talks about and others, there are maybe alterations in the neurochemistry of the sibling where they have some of the same genetic markers, but they don't have the autism. What's that about? Maybe there's a key there. As well, in terms of the neuroplasticity that we all know is the term of art of this era. The way Walter and Owen engage through a lifetime changes both of them profoundly. Their brains are shaped by each other. Now, at this point, Walter is 9. Another big theme of this book, because it's a big theme of our journey, is the instantaneity. And that's I don't know if it's a word, but I like it anyway, with which the brain shapes narrative. Now, there's some good studies on this these days. It's like lightning. Store, discard, save. We're doing it every minute, shaping what we need to see. Now, this goes way back. In the Talmud, you've got that line, we don't see things as they are, we see things as we are. That's a couple thousand years old. Now the neuroscientists say, let me show you how that works. Now we are shaping at this point a narrative, a whole bunch of them, including a narrative about our older son, Walt, Owen's protector. Many kids, siblings of those with challenges like this, become junior adults very young. A friend of mine who lived such a life said, it wasn't personal, I didn't blame my parents, I just called it pragmatic neglect. I knew they'd have their hands full with my brother, and that's just the way it was going to be. But in terms of the development of the sibling, Walter at 9 is a junior adult. We have built a narrative to make sense of that. We tell ourselves, Cornelia and I, a story. Walter's first day of school, first grade, Cornelia, Walter, and Owen are in the car, 5 blocks away from a new school he's going to, mind you, Lafayette School up in Northwest near Chevy Chase Circle. 5 blocks away, Walt says, oh, this is good. Cornelia's like, what? This is good. You can just leave me here. What? I can take it from here. Cornelia's like, this isn't Dickens. They know you have parents. Walt's like, no, I'm good. This starts to build narrative for us. Walter, the world's most independent child. He can handle adults. He can handle children. He can handle incoming missiles if need be. But the key combination is he will not leave his little brother behind. That's what we want to see. So we don't really notice or mind or really see as pertinent something we do notice a little, that he gets emotional only on one day of the year, his birthday. And he gets emotional a little bit on his 9th birthday. Kids leave, we're cleaning up the cups and the glasses and the plates and the cake. And Owen follows us into the kitchen, looks at us intently, like there's some little geyser bubbling up, and says, Walter doesn't want to grow up like Mowgli or Peter Pan. This is his first complex sentence. This is his first complex thought expressed. We're like, huh? It's like a lightning bolt went through the kitchen. And then he's off in his private reverie, and we don't stop talking for 4 hours. Now, at this juncture in our lives, I have been out there on the hustings writing that book Tom talked about, the Pulitzer Prize-winning series and the book. It's all coming together about kids in a blighted urban terrain across town in our little area here. And what I learned looking back, Owen had changed me. I was once a journalist of a more traditional stripe. It's easy to write objectively, step back, sum up, embrace omniscience, knowingness, certainty. What we're paid for. Give me a topic, I'm an expert in 2 weeks. Bingo. And off to the next thing. It's easy to do that when your life is intact. When you live a life that's a mess, though, it's not so easy. And I'm a mess. But the fact is, I go to this blighted terrain across town, a whole school of kids that have been left behind. And after a bit, my eyes start to adjust. They walk on my side of town, those kids. People stare at them long enough to look away. And they cross the street. They look at them not all that differently from the way they look at my son, another left behind person. That helps me grow against my better judgment. That's the life we're living. I'm living. Cornelia is living a life of carpools and therapists, and up at 3 in the morning when he's thrashing and inconsolable, where she holds him. And so after the lightning bolt goes through the kitchen, she looks at me and goes, do something. I live with him. You're the crazy one. You're the one who dressed up as a clown at the birthday party. You wear the propeller hat. Find a way in. This is a challenge. I want to do my part. So I crawl up to the bedroom. Owen's up there looking at a Disney book. We have every Disney product that's produced at this point. I mean, my God, we're like floating the Disney stock at this juncture. Owen's looking at a book. Picture, you can't read, of course. 6.5. And I go, what do I do? What do I do? What do I do? Okay. Well, he's sitting there, and I look over and I see we have puppets, every puppet. Everyone you can buy. We have one called Iago. Okay, here we go. Iago. Okay, Aladdin. Anyone see that movie? There you go. Okay, this is the villain sidekick. Okay, so Jafar is the villain. Iago is his evil sidekick. Owen seems to love this character. I don't know what it's about. And we got the plush toy, the $98 toy, sitting on the ground, and I reach around and I grab it, and I put it on my elbow. I'm like, okay. So I crawl along the rug there. Owen doesn't really see me, and I throw the bedspread over my head because it's kind of off the side of the bed. And I push the puppet up through the bedspread. And I talk to him as Iago. This would be the voice of Gilbert Gottfried. Okay, anyone could do it. It's an easy voice. It's like a broken Cuisinart.
Okay, Owen, what does it feel like to be you? Okay.
Owen turns to the parrot like he is bumping into an old friend. And he says, it's not good. I'm lonely, and I have no friends. Now, I have father tricks that I've built up over years to close off tear ducts. It's mostly a jaw thing. You got to really crunch it. So I am crunching it. And I say, just don't give into it. Just stay in character. It's like a window opens. I don't want it to close. Be Iago.
Okay. So when did you and I become such good friends?
When I watched Aladdin, and it was so funny, you made me laugh. And we start to talk. This is our first conversation. Owen and Iago. That guy. And after about 2 minutes of this, all of a sudden I hear Owen go, like somebody in his throat. It sounds like he's choking. I'm ready to throw the bedspread off. And then I hear, I love the way your foul little mind works. Wait, that's Jafar.
So I say, oh, Jafar, you always talk that way.
And this begins our life, right here. Next chapter unfolding. Villain, evil sidekick, talking to each other. Okay, if that's what it's going to be, let it be. Cornelia and I huddle, as we do 10 times a day, and we're like, okay, well, he had all the lines exactly, really. Yes, every line of dialogue was exact. Now, oh yes, there's a term for that. Scripting. We've heard that one too, like echolalia. Well, let's work with it. And we start what we call the basement sessions. We play all the characters in the basement. With Walter too. Jungle Book's a big movie, so I become Baloo. I know, it's a height issue, but I'm okay with that. Cornelia, of course, is Bagheera, the protective panther. In character. Walter's King Louie. Tell me the secret of man's red fire, man cub. And Owen speaks to us as Mowgli. And he just doesn't do the voice. We feel the heat of the emotions Mowgli is feeling. Now we say to ourselves, does he understand what he's saying? I don't know. Let's assume he does. Let's start there with that assumption and see how it works out. What do we realize? Neurologically. And we realize this only because Owen later has described it to us in what I call a Temple Grandin-like effusion of exposition. He said, well, when we moved to Washington, I couldn't understand anything you or Mom were saying. He said this just a few years ago. He's 23 now, just turned 23. And Cornelia says, was that scary? He says, it was weird, and then he paused for a minute, and worrisome. He said, I can imagine. I said, but those movies, I always wanted to ask him, could you understand the dialogue in the movies? He says, well, it seemed like familiar, but not really. But the exaggerated faces and the exaggeration of the emotions of those characters that I could see. This is what happens. This is the little key that gets turned in the lock. He memorized 20 Disney animated movies as sound alone. Like you memorize a Kurosawa movie, even if you don't know Japanese. And then he tried to do what a little kid does, fit it together, contextualize it. Now, he is context blind, and I can say that term, and everyone knows what I'm talking about. But in this place, he starts to get context deep. And he starts to attach them. Now, we have an advantage here. Why? Because he already has laid down and encoded 60 hours of dialogue and lyrics. So you throw him a line, he'll throw you back the next one. A lyric, he'll sing the song. So that's what we do. Every night, we go to the basement. In these movies, in the 50 animated movies since Snow White in 1937, I mean, what's not in there? And I know people who hate Disney go, oh, they're treacly tales. They have happy endings. I don't like that. I'm like, I feel like, that Woody Allen movie where he gets Marshall McLuhan from behind the curtain? You know that one. I feel like that. I said, well, actually, I have Joseph Campbell right here. Joseph, would you please talk to this person? Well, you see, these stories go back thousands of years, and it's really only in the West that, for some reason, I don't know why, that we push into the kids department. These are the stories human beings have told themselves for thousands of years to make their way in the world. Even in the East with anime, the Japanese don't say that's for the kids, that's for everybody. Myth, after all, as Campbell says, is just what you call someone else's religion. No. The child, the silent child, he's right about that. Owen doesn't know who Joseph Campbell is. He doesn't even care now. None of them know the supposed to's. None of them do what I was taught to do, which is find out what the teacher wants and give it to them on a silver platter with a garnish so I can get my ticket punched. Go to the next stop. Again. And what's happening while I'm doing that is a gigantic game of musical chairs. Eventually, I am hearing the music. It's the most brutal of the childhood games, and of course, it's one we play all the way to death as adults. Owen can't hear the music. But he sees things that are without context for us. I'll jump ahead 2 stops. Quickly, he does get thrown out of a school, and it's very painful for him. He is at the wonderful and powerful Lab School of Washington. And everyone nods. You all know that school. Arguably one of the most famous schools in America. Cornelia and I, using every possible tool in our toolkit, every connection we got. I mean, I've got a Pulitzer Prize. That's going to help, right? Literally, we'll do anything short of murder to get him into that school. Mostly they're LD kids. Everyone's LD, but LD, mostly dyslexic, a lot of ADHD, some kids with various processing issues, and a few spectrum kids. We make him one of them. It's going to be a battle, but we'll manage it. And it doesn't work out. So after 5 years at the lab school, Sally Smith, a larger-than-life character, and I are in the office. She says, I'm sorry. He's out. Cornelia and I joke about this. She's Irish. I'm Jewish. As a Jewish guy, my first response is mostly neurosis and self-blame. Cornelia's Irish. This is how they survived on the rocky coast for 1,000 years. I was just glad she wasn't with me in the meeting, because it might have ended in violence. Because we both knew Owen would be terribly bruised. We hoped he wouldn't notice. He's 11. He does. He can't really say it. He can't really express himself in full speech. Not at this point. But what does he do when he's whacked? And we know he's been bruised. He goes into the basement, the magic underground. The magic underground, mind you, where we sing songs about that shore up above, where someday he will go to be part of our world. That underground where he says, when you wish upon a star, it makes no difference who you are. It's hard to hear that. That's not the kids' department. Not even close. And that's where he goes. Interestingly, he picks up a line. I think it's from me or Walter, because it's not the way he talks. At the top of the steps, he says, "I'll be in the basement. Hold all calls." It's like he's working on a project down there. Must be some kind of mimicry. What do we find months hence in the basement? Owen has become an aficionado of the sidekicks. Now, what are sidekicks? Owen will tell you in a very routinized way. They help the hero fulfill his destiny. Help the hero fulfill his destiny. It's a classic definition. True. There are hundreds of them in Disney. Some are goofy, some are resourceful, some are confused, some are wise. Hundreds of them. He realizes what's happening. He hears the music of that game of musical chairs. And he's out. Other kids racing forward. He's caught in the starting blocks. And he becomes an aficionado of hundreds of them. A sidekick he. Begins to draw furiously. Hyperfocus. What is that? A compensatory strength. The traditional pathways are blocked. He builds a compensatory strength. The brain finds a way. This is what we know now. Even the notions we had of the map of that brain 15 years ago. Frontal lobe this, left hemisphere that, cerebral cortex this. Even now we know that it's much more nimble than we could have ever imagined in terms of the fast fire connections. Well, that compensatory strength is all of a sudden a laser beam focus where he opens the Disney books and he looks at the face of a character with an emotion he wants to feel. Sebastian showing fear, the crab, Little Mermaid, when Ariel loses her voice, draws it exactly. Slow, steady, like one of those machines. And I find the first sketchbook, there are 100 pictures. All sidekicks, no heroes. And at the end, there are two things scribbled in a kindergartner's scrawl. First is, I am the protector of sidekicks. And finally, no sidekick gets left behind. Creating a language from the affinity to express what is deep within him. Last twist, and we get to present. Years pass. He's 14. His brother challenges him. Owen's going on about the return to traditional hand-drawn animation. Of course, it's a dead letter since Toy Story came out in 1995. They do these computer animated movies, they do them every 2 weeks. Owen wants a hand-drawn because he draws in a way he can only feel with his fingers. So as parents, Walter's 17, Owen's 14, we're the mom and dad. Owen's going on, traditional hand-drawn animation has to come back, and we say what parents say because we're idiots. It will, honey, don't worry. Now, Owen knows better. This is the one thing he knows. So Walter looks at the two of us and goes, how did I pick these parents? Owen, look at me. It's not coming back. I mean, they fired half the hand-drawn animators now. I mean, look, they're putting out 2 computer animated movies a week. If you want it to come back, you've got to step up, buddy. Owen's kind of startled. Now, Walter, in his period, is the only one drawn as a hero. Cards, birthday cards. I'm Merlin. Owen draws a character. We're sidekicks. Cornelia's Big Mama from Fox and the Hound. Anyone see that one? No one saw that one. The wisest and gentlest of the sidekicks. I'm Merlin or Rafiki, which I'm very happy about. If you get to be Rafiki, very big. That's that guy here. He's the king. When I'm under investigation from the Bush administration, it was a bad period. It was in the Suskind family. Owen gives me a Father's Day card, and it's Long John Silver from Treasure Planet. I'm like, Long John Silver? You're kind of like a pirate now, Dad. I'm like, okay. But with a heart of gold. I'm like, good. Thank you. Tell your mother when you see her. The only one drawn as a hero is Walter. He's speaking. This is what we find. They'll speak through their affinity, if you can hear the language. And I'll tell you stories that will enliven you about what we found on that very score. On the many affinities. Some kids are anime kids. Some kids, Thomas the Tank is huge. You know that. Because of the frozen faces. Percy, Thomas. Situations are clear. I bumped into a family the other day. Black and white movies from the 40s and 50s. I'm like, that's a good thing. There's a lot there. So on this day, Owen's hero challenges him. Come up with something. You got any movie ideas in there? You got to lead the charge, buddy. Dinner table, Owen freezes. We all freeze. We see something happening. That bubbling up. That bubbling up we saw at 6.5 that time. It doesn't happen all that often, but once in a while, I have one. We get quiet. No one speak. It's coming. Okay, 12 sidekicks searching for a hero. And in their journey and in the obstacles they face, each finds the hero within themselves. That's Owen's story. We shape narrative. Something we can place ourselves within. Gives us coherence. Gives us a sense of path and purpose. So where are we today? Well, Owen is off at a school in Cape Cod. Some of you may know it's a great one of the best, called Riverview School. For kids with challenges, 60 to 90 IQ, they say. Of course, putting an IQ number on these kids, there should be a law against it, really. But they do get tagged. There it is, little tattoo. Owen's got a 75. Right there. That lets people off the hook just like that. Oh, good, 75. Okay, here's a mop. Okay, just that area there. Forever. We good? Be happy. That makes me a little crazy, in case you're wondering. So, Owen gets to this school. Of course, he gets there, he wants friends. He has trouble with friends. For years, he had no friends at all. Kids he knew, but not real friends. So what does he do the first day he gets to Riverview? He gets up there and he starts to noodle and he talks to us. He starts Disney Club. We come 8 months later. I'm up at Harvard as the writer in residence or something up at the Kennedy School. And we drive from Harvard Square to Cape Cod. And we look around. The room's got 12 kids just like him. Now, some have very modest speech. All sorts of functional levels. Very diverse. But they're all embracing the affinity. This is where it gets lovely and powerful and surprising. Opening pores. Now you've got a random sample. You've got about 12 of them, fairly diverse. Some are ABA kids, some not. Some four-time kids. Some, I don't know what they are. But every one of them embraces Disney early as their shared context. Many of the non-speaking kids embrace non-speaking characters. Pluto, Dumbo, huge. Because they express all emotions, the full range without words. Cornelia and I arrive here. I mean, it's like we've been training our whole life for this moment. They're watching Dumbo the first night. Good choice. One of the girls, her name's Emily. I say, Dumbo. She says, I'm a Dumbo girl. I said, why? Well, she was non-speaking as a small child. She bonded with the non-speaking character. Well, the thing that made Dumbo an outcast were the ears. And over time, he learned what I've learned, that the thing that made him different was his greatest strength. And he let him soar. That's why I'm a Dumbo person. That's all Owen had to hear. Owen and Emily have been boyfriend and girlfriend for 2 years now. She's a Dumbo girl. That's all he needed to hear. He knew everything right then. It's one after another. It's like a dam break. Interestingly, many of them were told what we often told Owen, based on our beloved therapists and specialists who we would walk across hot coals for. Cut it off. It's perseverative. It's an obsession. It's to the exclusion of all else. Definition of obsession. We tried that. There were times when Owen's 8 and 9 and 10, when we're trying to keep him in the last school, where we locked the television. We had a padlock. I had a key. I was like the federal marshal. And only I hold the key. Every time we did, and we use it as a behavioral tool. Very common. If you want to watch the beloved video, here are 10 things you've got to do. Each one of them like walking across hot coals. What happens? Well, some behavioral spike, a little bit. He's trying to act as he should. But then after a month or two, it's like we cut off his supply line. He was divorced from his nourishment. Back and forth. Until eventually we go, stop. What do we find? When we were doing the behavioral experiments, we did many of them, after a bit, he wouldn't let us back in. I don't want to watch it with you. I'll watch it by myself. Yeah. You realize we weren't honest brokers, as they say. It's like inviting the private equity guy into your company. He's not there to help you. The kids pick this up. Their identity is deeply linked to this affinity. I mean, think of it this way. Neurotypicals. Charlie Brown's teacher. Wah, 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 wah. Wah, 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 wah. Charlie Brown. Wah, 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 wah. Charlie Brown. That's the only thing they're hearing. Replaying. Hypersystemizing, as my friend Simon Baron-Cohen says. Is it overlearning? Owen replaying it, watching it over and over? Let's get into the science. Obviously, we know from many experiments, their brains don't habituate wherever they sit on this particular place on the neurodiverse spectrum, as ours might. Owen can watch Beauty and the Beast and feel the same joy the first time and the 200th time. Now, actually, Cornelia's mother feels the same thing when she used to hear the Ave Maria. I'm not sure where you fit on the habituation issue there. Certain movies, I mean, I can watch On the Waterfront 1,000 times. I can watch that scene in the back of the cab. You know, my brother, you should have been good to me. It's in me. I have voices in me. We all do. Well, he doesn't habituate exactly like I do. But the joy, the motivation, means he watches it the 100th time, and each time he's digging for some detail he missed, some little interplay of character or theme, idea. Is that overlearning? I think that is all there with obsession. Over, maybe not. He's looking for patterns. He's looking for depth. He's looking for the stuff that creates language. Every one of the kids in Disney Club did that. Now there's a kid there. His name's Josh. Very routinized. One of the dorm counselors, as we're sitting around, says, well, I don't know if Josh should be here. I said, well, why? Well, he's got no reachable emotional core. Okay, I've heard that before. You know, and he's got some emotional issues. You know, he's frustrated. I said, well, that makes sense. His affect is very much like a Rain Man affect. First thing he asks us, Mr. Suskind, when's your birthday? I said, November 20th, 1959. And his eyes flash. He says, that's Friday. Cornelia was actually born on a Monday. We didn't know that, but he checked. It's true. We checked the calendar. I say, Josh, who's your person? Who did you bond with? And he looks at me, kind of startled, and he says, Pinocchio. I'm like, Pinocchio. Now, the dorm counselor says, is that because of issues of truth? Now, that comment alone shows a little confusion. I mean, obviously, we know these kids. they're chromosomally unable to say anything but the truth. And he goes, no, no, no. It's because, Mr. Suskind, I feel like a wooden boy. And I've always dreamed of feeling what real boys feel. And I was born with wooden eyes. And it is so hard to see from them. Powerful self-knowledge. When I sit with Simon Baron-Cohen, he's like, well, you know, that is a bit of a challenge to the theory of mind ideals. You know that. I said, I do. But not in a bad way. What does Simon do? Love the guy. He's out there. Sometimes he gets out on a tree branch that breaks, but I love him for that. Because he is pushing the envelope every chance he gets. This is not about building a mountain of empiricism and data and sitting on top of it. This is about searching. He says, well, here's what we did. We created this movie. I don't know if you've seen it. Thomas the Tank Engine. So they created a knockoff of Thomas the Tank in the UK. They had about £500,000, and someone gave them some money. And what is it? It's essentially a crafted Thomas the Tank with cars and buses and things. Very similar. They go on tracks, the faces are frozen, the situations are clear, to teach all manner of social knowledge, very much Michelle Garcia Wenner stuff, so the kids understand what they should do in terms of interaction. He's like, but what you're telling me is that with the proper hypersystemizing, Owen can hypersystemize an 89-minute Disney movie that's emotionally so very rich. I mean, everything's in there. So we're setting the bar much too low, even with our experiment. I said, yeah. This is what we find. Well, we jump forward, and we'll start with questions. Sorry I'm going so long. We'll do at least 20 minutes of questions. So now at the end of this journey, Disney Club has been going for almost 3 years. Owen will be graduating in 2 months. It's 35 kids. It's a mob scene. What do we find? They're context blind in the world in which we walk. Here they're context deep. And as they sit together in the place of context depth, what creates comfort? Context. You see social engagements, building, flowing, little threads, side by side. There are 3 boyfriend-girlfriend couples in Disney Club. They sing songs. They talk. They feel a sense of strength of numbers, identity, all the stuff we want. Surprising to the parents who are our friends. There's been growth in the 3 years. The first year, there's a girl in Disney Club, young woman at that point. She's 18. She doesn't speak for 5 meetings. She doesn't speak very much. Finally, I say, help me here. Talk to me. Her name's Sarah. I said, Sarah, help me. Aladdin. What's this movie about? What's it really about? She was frightened. Oh, I'm like Robin Williams now. I'm sliding around on the rug. She goes, I said, you have to say something. I know you can talk. And she goes, don't say a thing. Just holds up her finger. I bend in as close as I can. I said, is there a word? Wishes. Wishes. One word. Wishes. And around the room I go, okay. Now I'm Robin Williams. And no wishing for more wishes. Everyone gets one wish. What is it? Around the room, everyone offers their wish. Powerfully interpreted. Sarah now chats away. This is hopeful. So let's get to the final lovely science of this. What's happening now? Since the stories in the New York Times, the book, and part of this was seeded by Cornelia and me as we ran around talking to specialists, telling them about what our 20-year experiment, wrestling with affinity, yielded. 20 years. They were taking notes. And not just Simon Baron-Cohen, we saw over at Cambridge, but others. Yale and MIT. Kevin Pelfrey leading the Yale team, John Gabrielli leading the MIT team. They're saying these affinities have been the elephant in the room forever. We've gone through a 20-year period. We said they are not productive. They are perseverative. They are pathological. They are to be reduced.
That clearly didn't work on balance. These kids, many of whom lived through that, just like Owen did, part by part. When we get in Disney Club, it's like a geyser, a dam break. They've been working it all that time. So what we'll do now in this multi-site international study that these 3 universities are starting and others are joining is to study affinity in a new way, reversing the telescope, as Tom said. What does that mean? That means they're going to study it both as neuroscience. They're going to do fMRIs to see what parts of the brain light up as they're engaged in their sweet spot. What parts of Owen's brain lights up when he's watching his favorites? Okay. Is some of the reward circuitry activated? I'll bet it is. Are the various parts of the brain that we are looking for in terms of social engagement activated? Are they building theory of mind acuity? We have found it. Can it be shown? And, crucial, these insights will be walking side by side with therapeutic innovation, so that the two often competing camps of the neuroscientists, the therapists, will be working side by side. What's working? Interesting. What we expect to find, what they expect to find, is that certain kids will be identifiable based on the affinity, because that's where they show themselves. That will help us understand what will work for them. Some kids may be like Owen. Some kids may be more inclined toward pattern recognition and maps, train schedules, anime. They're all different parts of a kind of identifying mechanism. That's the key. What we're going to look at is what mechanism is firing. You've got to get the mechanism. And thereby, we'll start to slice up this group of the many autisms as to where's their sweet spot. And then you get to work. Just like we've been doing for 20 years. We and our therapists, not just me and Cornelia, the whole gang. Team Owen. That, we hope, will activate a kind of 3-part step-by-step. Affinity leads to recognition and measurement of underlying capability that may be otherwise invisible, which hopefully will lead to better possibilities in the lives of these people. Part of what I'm hopeful about is that the yardstick of the meritocracy, I say this broadly, I've written a lot about it over the years, that has rewarded most of us in this room. And Owen's got his 75 IQ tattooed here, sadly. You know, I got my SAT score tattooed here. My mother did that. I should get that removed. It's a barrier. It means I don't see things. It means I miss lights hidden under bushel baskets. It means I say, be more like me. I mean, this is pretty great. Look at this. I mean, the suit's rented, but the rest of it's nice. That's where we miss it, that blind spot. They don't want to be like us. They want to be more like them. And if we could have a yardstick to show, for instance, Cornelia would get frustrated by this. Okay, show me what is the measurement for inventing a language, an emotional language, out of scripts, out of 110 hours of scripts? Where's that? You got a measurement for that? You know, look, embrace humility here. We're all brilliant and wonderful. But measuring human capacity, potential, be 1,000 years before we can do that. Catching what Owen does, the guy Tom talked about before, Cedric Jennings, Hope in the Unseen. African-American kid, context blind in the wider world. You know what happens out here. No, he's not neurologically challenged.
like Owen is, but he's context blind. He doesn't know what he's supposed to do, doesn't care. He's in the fix. The brain finds a way. His brain, Owen's brain, my brain. He's hanging by a thread his first year at the fabled Ivy League institution. He's going to go back to Southeast. One thread to be cut. In A Hope in the Unseen. It's one of the most dramatic moments, certainly the most dramatic moment, I think, in that book. And who's he sitting with? He's sitting with one of us, a teacher who gives him an assignment. He's supposed to do double space with footnotes, bloodless, objective. It's about heterogeneous and homogeneous grouping at a school just like the one he grew up in Southeast Washington. He can be bloodless. He can do it. It's too close to his gut and his heart, and he's outraged. What does he do? 3 in the morning, before this paper has to be handed in, and if he doesn't do well, he's going home. Failed. He writes a 68-line epic poem. Brilliant. Finds a way. It's the way he expresses his essence. Now it's for the teacher to decide. It's us. This isn't even close to the assignment. And I should fail him. He didn't ask permission. It's brilliant. Look at that. Wow. How does he do that? The teacher's a ringer. He's not a Brown professor. He's one of these Ted Sizer fellows. You know, they're in a fellowship. He runs a magnet school in Cincinnati. It's a lucky break for Cedric. He's been broadened by unlikely experience. And he says, Cedric, sit down. Look, you got a lucky break with me. I know who you are. I got a whole school full of you kids in inner city Cincinnati. Look, you can't give up your passion here. Some people might say obsession. It's actually what organizes and integrates you. Look what you can do when you embrace it. You know, we don't educate that way. It's one size fits all. It doesn't work very well. But I'm going to give you a B-, but you got to work with me, one-on-one. Lovas, Greenspan, one-on-one. I'm going to work with you in the afternoons. I'm going to teach you how to do what we need you to do here to get by. Okay? He has a choice. We all have a choice. Cedric passes. Cedric graduates 3 years later with a 3.4 average and gets his master's at Harvard. It's a thread. You snip it or not. Same conversation. People who don't have a place at the table because they can't hit the bell. Because they don't know they're supposed to. They're not born in the yeasty, lovely place where I was born. Or they're neurologically challenged, as Owen is. Either way, a traditional barrier is not open for business. A traditional pathway. They build a compensatory strength. I'll tell you a final story. It's a beauty. Owen goes to the opening of Aladdin on Broadway just 3 weeks ago. Of course, he's now a celebrated character inside of the Walt Disney Corporation. They come up one after another and shake his hand. Owen, thank you. Thank you. Everyone, Bob Iger too, the whole gang. Owen actually is more interested, though, in the animators, people who write the music. And he meets one later, Alan Menken. He wrote all the songs that Owen sings. Some he sings every morning. Whole New World. Why? Well, because the world's new every day for me. Alan wrote those songs with Howard Ashman, who died of AIDS many years ago. Alan and Owen meet. It's mythic. And Alan says, thank you, Owen, for showing me something I couldn't see. And then after a while, Alan says, you know, look, I hope Alan doesn't mind me saying this. I don't think he will. I was LD. I'm learning disabled. I was a guy with trouble in school. What did I do? Put notes together in my head. Compensatory strength. He's celebrated for it. This is our challenge. And it's our challenge. We're hopeful. that the many communities are moving as one here. Now, I'm going to out Tom here a little bit. You've heard Tom do the 4 eyes. Anyone hear that? It's beautiful. He actually tried it out on me back when we met, about 1.5 years ago. They said, look, I'm entering this big autism community. I've been not public about this, about our wife and our son. He said, let me explain it to you. He draws a circle with ASD in the middle, and then he draws a square with 4 points. He says, okay, there are 4 eyes. 1 eye is injury. The kids have been injured by something out there in the vast toxicity of what we breathe and inhale, and taste and touch. And they're angry, and I understand that, and they want to be known and repaired for what's happened. And you got illness. Not so sure. How it happens, who can say? Coursing through the genetic code. And down here you got identity. Especially among folks who say, look, I'm not a broken toy. I hear that from Owen a little bit now. This is who I am. This is not a spell that gets broken. I am a person on the autism spectrum. That's me. I'm not in the broken toy department. And then insight. All the scientists, Eric Kandel saying it so beautifully, to know autism will mean we know the brain because of a pervasive developmental expression of it. It almost like opens a window, a side window you can look in. Well, I'm here to add a 5th eye that we learned slowly. We learned and often didn't want to learn it. We thought it was wrong sometimes. Because we said, look, he's got so many challenges, so many up ahead. Every day is going to be another challenge. But it's undeniable, irrefutable, that so much of what we found through what he has taught us is inspiration. That is an important part of this mix. The tragedy and suffering of the lives of so many people. It's just overwhelming. Society is judged by what it does for its least fortunate. We are failing that one. Here and all over the planet. But as someone who's written stories my whole life to try to get people across the moat, across the deep chasm, to a place where they go, what are you doing here? You're my enemy. Or, yeah, I guess you're right. This guy, Cedric, he's my guy. Yours too. I feel deeply how important it is to see things as they really are, not as we are. And that, taught by Owen, a left-behind kid, inspires us to be better. You know, I had to give a speech at the United Nations for World Autism Awareness Day. They called me about 3 weeks ahead. And I said, what is that? I didn't even know what it was. I just wasn't doing that. No. And then I checked, that's a kind of a big deal. So I said, they said, can you come? I said, yeah, I mean, I have a lunch. I can cancel the lunch. So I go there. Now, a little like this place, it's kind of the same era. You know, it's kind of, it needs a redo. You feel that 60s thing, you know? High ideals. The torch has been passed. I think it's been dropped. And going to the UN, I mean, you know, to be fair, it's a little tricky to find a pulse in the place. You know, the guys with the headphones, hello, it's just... But I'm honored to go.
So I get up there, and it's in the ESOC chamber. The General Assembly, the biggest room, is under construction, so they're in the next biggest room, which is big. A lot of World Health people there, and specialists in autism and special needs, and some delegates. And I do my thing. I try to, get the pulse up a little bit. Just, get some action. I challenge him. I'm a little noisy. My wife's going, I ignore her, which is stupid. She's trying to help. And after the speech is coming to its end, I've gone through about 20 minutes, I look over and I see across the room there are about 25 kids in blue T-shirts. Lighted up blue. Bob and Suzanne. There it is. And they're wearing the shirts, and they're all Spectrum kids, junior high age. So all of a sudden, I start talking to them, and I feel better. It's like that Barack Obama thing, fired up, ready to go. I feel better talking to them. And they're looking right back at me. I start talking about imagination, its power, how in some ways it rewires our brain. It's true. How stories get shaped, and we live within them. They seem to get that. So after a couple nods from about 30 kids over there, 25 kids, I take the mic off the thing. It's a removable one. And I walk across the well. It's a big kind of giant well. It's a UN. It takes you 10 minutes to walk across. And I say, okay, hey, everybody. There's like 2 rows of them. You know Beauty and the Beast, right? Yeah. So listen, this is an anthem, a rallying cry that's sung in Disney Club. And I mentioned Disney Club in the speech, so they're like, yeah, okay, they get that. Older kids like them. It's okay. Okay, now, and you know the song. It's the I Wish song. Every hero or heroine sings it in the 3rd scene of a Disney movie. That's how you know that's the hero. I wish. So you know that he or she's the hero and everyone else is a sidekick. So Belle sings, I wish. I want adventure in the great wide somewhere. I'm sorry I can't sing, but I'm doing my best. I want it more than I can tell. But for once it might be grand. And then we sing together. To have someone understand. I want so much more than they've got planned. And they all sing it. Because they sing this in Disney Club. And they're singing to us. 2 weeks ago, Leslie Stahl interviewed Owen Suskind on CBS. He's sitting in the hot seat, like 60 Minutes, that kind of thing. And she says, Owen, in the book that your dad wrote, but this is the part you wrote, the end of it, you talk about sidekicks and heroes. And you say that we don't get redrawn, that we're all really sidekicks searching for our inner hero. Beautiful idea. And that somehow heroism is a choice. Each day it's your choice. And that we don't get redrawn in this life. And if we do, we're lost. Owen nods. Well, how do you see yourself now? It's been an exciting month for Owen Suskind, famously left behind child who did not speak, representing a country of left behind children who often don't speak. He says, I feel a little different now. Actually, I feel more like Aladdin now. A diamond in the rough. A joyous diamond in the rough. I am more than I appear. So I bear that from Owen. I talked to him a few minutes ago. And he said, tell them I am a diamond in the rough. Thanks for coming out tonight. Oh, gosh. Look, I know I went over here, but I have nothing else planned except dinner with your guy here. So if people want to stay right now and ask questions, I would love to do some questions. even 4 or 5 of them. I'll do quick answers because you all are special questioners, let's just say.
So let's do that. If people have to leave, because I know we're beyond 5, feel free to do that. But let's take a minute to allow people to leave, and then anybody who wants to stay longer to chat with Ron, you're welcome to do that.
I'll do voices and everything, so if you want. Okay, who's got one? Quick. You in the back, yeah. Well, talk really loud.
You know, having a friend who has a child hearing subject is absolutely beautiful. But I guess, what would your advice be to parents who every day struggle with that? Is their friend part of who, you know, is going through and trying to do everything in perfect pilot?
I talk to lots of parents with kids who have no speech. And they ask me, what can I do? And I say, of course you do what every one of us do, try everything. But some things we've seen that have been helpful. Let me give you one. We have a friend of ours, a family from Riverview. This child does not have enough expressive capabilities to be in the school. He has no speech, really. Very little, a couple words. Well, he's a Pluto guy. He loves Pluto. What they do is they have Pluto up. Pluto does this or that. They freeze the screen, and they have words to check, like a checklist, a box. It's like check, check, check. First, happy. What's Pluto feeling? They say to Christopher. And he always checks happy because they usually check that first. But after time, after several examples, instances, and efforts, he starts to check confused, which is what Pluto is expressing. Over time, he gets a couple of words from this. They are communicating. It's slow. It may take years, but the fact is that there is connection. You know, many of the kids just like to murmur or sing the songs. When you're singing with them, there is an opportunity for side-by-side play, which we have found when Owen did it, when he wasn't speaking, created the gossamer threads of some connection. Part of the idea is to respect the affinity. Find out what it is, which is often hard. But most parents I talk to, even with kids with very little speech, say, oh, he's into that or she's into this. They know what it is. And simply sharing that joy, instead of trying to fix them every day, because that's something Cornelia and I learned too. She's like, that's not a parent-child relationship that's ever going to work. Imagine if every minute of your life your mother was trying to fix you. Actually, that was my life, but that's a different issue. That's not a relationship you want. And so once we respected his affinity and dove in and said, let's make this joyous, even if we feel bizarre dancing in front of a screen, things occurred that surprised us. And just the warmth of that shared interaction was not nothing, it was something. Somebody else.
So I have a 9-year-old son, Isaac,
Yeah?
who's on the autism spectrum. In fact, we moved from Cambridge, Massachusetts down to Rockville, Maryland when he was 3 years old.
Okay.
That's where our journey began with him. But, you know, Disney movies are great. I love Disney movies, and the 4 that you listed in particular. But Isaac can't sit through movies. He doesn't enjoy them. He has other fascinations. I just want to give you one example, which is maps. And he can trace, you know, he's got a map of Maryland, Virginia, D.C. on his wall, and he can recopy every highway on paper. And each highway actually has a personality, and he tells stories about them and where they intersect. And I'm wondering, you know, how can we access that affinity for Isaac with something like a highway? You know, I-270 doesn't quite have the charm of Rafiki or Dumbo.
Thank you very much for that. I-270 will actually be a stage show in the fall. It's on Broadway. I'm driving up I-270. Okay, that's a great question. Now, I won't mention whose, but I happen to have a friend, a researcher, a guy I know. His kid is a map kid. He's 12 years old now.
he, like your son, this kid memorized the Rand McNally World Atlas, every page. Okay, so he knows what's southeast of Timbuktu and every other page on the map. Now, the father and the mother are like, what do we do with that? Of course, my response, they're not even up to where you are. I mean, God, he's creating characters out of roads. That's fabulous. My God. This kid, though, you say, fine, what are maps? Maps are everything. Maps are essentially the coding, the mapping of the entire human pageant is maps. Every town on every map has a history, often a story of why that's the name of that town. They go down 1,000 feet. They mark where people live and their identities. Next to whom, on what side, in what place. Maps are wonderful. You know, and literally, an educator who was talking about the map thing says, okay, let's just say, she said, she's a brilliant woman. She says, let's just say during the Renaissance, it didn't work out quite the way it did. And maps are huge now. Maps were everything. And people say to me now, Ron, hey, Ron, listen, if you can't map this thing, there's really nothing we have to talk about. And this writing thing you do, you should do that by yourself, in your room. In some ways, that's how arbitrary some of these value judgments are. They're bell curve judgments. Now, in this case, this guy says to me, but here's the twist. My son is now drawing imaginary maps which are mapping his emotional landscape. Phew, bingo. So you need to learn to speak map. And he will speak back to you in map. That's exciting. And creating imaginary characters based on I-270, my God, get the kid an agent. That's genius. This is part of what we're talking about, the compensatory strength. As soon as you see the teacher going, oh boy, come after school. He's created an imaginary character of 495. This is not going to work. And what? And that's a problem for you, but not for him. Another question. Somebody else. Yes, yes.
So you describe that Owen at 6.5, he goes from these 3-word sentences to this complex, you sit with him as Iago and he says, I don't have friends, I'm lonely. That's something way more complex, and that's not in any Disney movie I've ever heard in terms of scripting. How do you think, what happened at 6 years old that was sort of that jump from I want this to I have no friends, I'm lonely?
Well, it's interesting because we looked ardently for scripts where those lines would be in them that he might have heard. We're constantly doing that. I mean, we really, and it's sometimes hard to look back on, we really guinea pigged him a lot here. And when he'd say something like, where did he get it from? What's the derivation? We couldn't find anything that matched that. It might have been something where he found a word and he expanded it. Because interestingly, you know, no sidekick gets left behind. We found its derivation. It's in the book. It's not in the Times piece, where there was a movie called Lilo and Stitch he saw about 8 months before he did that. And the line was Ohana, which is a Hawaiian word for family. And Ohana means no one gets left behind was in that movie. What he did is he attached it to the idea of sidekick. That was his original connection. But I think that's often what you find. It's the fitting together. This piece with that piece, there's the full thought. And that's a big part of what we are trying to do, because we want to figure out how this thing works for him. So we can do what we need, not just to connect with him and love him and be with him, but to help guide him. Eventually, let me tell you another little twist, which is something a lot of you therapists will love, is that later he's badly bullied in school. And it's a fabulous school. It just was a fluke, where a couple of emotionally disturbed kids got in the school. And, of course, they realized Owen, like all the other kids, believe everything. And it was like, it was a train wreck. So what they do is they say, Owen, hey, guess what? We know where you live. Now, I told Owen, if you think it's a joke, or you're not sure, make believe it's a joke. Play it as a joke, and then you'll find out if they're joking. But of course, this is very ham-handed. This doesn't often work. So he's like, that's a joke. And they're like, no joke. We know where you live. And guess what? You're going to come home, I think today or tomorrow, and your parents aren't going to be there because they don't love you. And he's like, they do so love me. It's like, no. And if you tell your parents what we said, we're going to come and burn your house down. He believes it. Okay. This is a nightmare. This goes on for many months. After this, once we figure it out, we go through a terrible period where he's to go through essentially trauma therapy because this has traumatized him. And after that's over, okay, we find he's beginning to regress. And this is trouble. That means he wants to throw away anything that bespeaks forward motion, the cell phone. He doesn't want to go out in the world. He's met the world. He doesn't want it. He doesn't like it. Again, this is something in terms of this methodology. This book is 300 pages of methodology of how to deal with the affinity. That's the whole thing. Trial and error, mostly error. So here we've got a challenge. What do we do? During the bullying, he was speaking sotto voce to a particular sidekick. He turned the sidekicks into advisors. We'd hear him murmuring under his breath. So while the bullies were after him, though we didn't know the bullies were after him, he's murmuring to a guy named Phil from Hercules. That's Danny DeVito. You know that movie, Hercules? See some nods here. Phil is what Owen calls a training sidekick who trains you for battle. He's the gentlest kid on the planet. So why is he talking to Phil? This helps us figure out he's being bullied. Afterward, when he's regressing, going to his therapist, Cornelia and I huddle, and then we talk, and driving in, I'm saying, okay, well, let's think about this. Why don't we have a boy like Owen get advised in the voice of one of the wise sidekicks? Because he does all the voices. It's like, it's flawless. So in the therapy session, Dan Griffin, brilliant therapist who's in the book, obviously he's in the Times piece, we're sitting there, and Dan and I are huddling. This is about therapists and families working together, a lot. We're all in a 20-year improvisation. Dan at the beginning said, turn off the affinity. It's not good. This is what we know. Then after a while, he's like, maybe we're not right about that. So I say, Dan, ask Owen to solve a problem for a boy like him. Dan knows what's up in the voice of one of the wise sidekicks. Now, Dan has a card on the wall in a frame to Dan, my therapist, who is my wise man. And, of course, the picture of Rafiki is drawn. And Dan looks at the picture and says, you think Rafiki? I said, Rafiki's good. Go with Rafiki. So here we are. This is the moment. Therapeutic moment. Big one. So Dan says, Owen, there's a boy a little like you, a little different. He's having trouble. He's afraid of growing up. He's fearful of the world. He wants to go backwards. What would Rafiki tell him? Without skipping a beat, Owen looks at Dan and goes, I would prefer Merlin. That's a great Merlin. Go with Merlin. And in Merlin's voice, okay, this is a guy named Carl Swenson, a voice work actor, died 30 years ago, but he lives in our house, this guy. Owen uses the first line from the script. This is from the movie. Knowledge and wisdom's the real power, my boy. Here's the thing. Remember I turned you into a fish? This is part of the movie. You've got to look at those waters like the unknown, like the future. You've got to swim, boy. The more you swim, the more you know. The future's up ahead. Now, Dan's looking at me like, is that in the movie? No, it's all fresh. Springboard. We find this with other kids. They use the scripted line and then, bing. Owen, we realize over the next couple of months, has developed what Vygotsky calls inner speech. You know Vygotsky, he's kind of hot these days. Kids on the spectrum are not supposed to be able to do that. For those of you who haven't read Vygotsky, when we're all about 2, we verbalize out loud, I want this, give me that. Where are my Ninja Turtles? Just like Owen. And then around 3, we start to develop an inner speech, talking to yourself, thinking things through, which eventually helps us and develops executive function. Spectrum kids are not supposed to do that. Many don't, I'm sure. But by virtue of all the work we're doing with these characters and their voices, Owen seems to develop inner speech using the characters.
So at this point, the characters are out in the open. So we can work with them. We can say, what about this? So what would Sebastian say to that? Zazu, another one. Solve a problem for Zazu. Dan created a model, a contract, where Owen helps Zazu. That would be the kind of proud and confused protective hornbill from Lion King. And by virtue of doing that, he is expressing and transposing feelings on Zazu that echo back. And this is a point where he starts to self-heal. He's working with Dan and with us to work through his stuff. Very hopeful. Inner speech. Okay, one more question. Come on. Are you in the back? Yeah. Just yell. Just yell. Okay, we're all going to go out to dinner with Tom together right now, and we're going to get funding for everyone here in the room. I'm just joking, Tom. Don't worry. You know, what we're hopeful about right now is that all four of the I's, and now the fifth arrival of inspiration, of improvisation, of innovation, that fifth I, now it's 6, 7, and 8, that we are going to get a kind of moment of shared purpose, I think. You know, especially after those CDC numbers came out, and I know about this, I deal in the world of news cycles. Everyone snapped around. You know, 42, that's a tough number. 1 out of every 42 boys. Now, the 68 number is brutal too, but with the 5 to 1, that's 2.5% of the male population of the United States. And if you go to our buddy David Amaral at Mind, and others say this too, he's like, we feel like this is the canary in the coal mine. Autism spectrum disorders. If you look across the population, 1 in 5 people have some neurologically expressed challenge when you put them all together. 1 in 5, that's 20%. That's critical mass. I think we're at a point of inflection here. I mean, I hope we are. You get to a certain depth and breadth, and people go, okay, that's not their problem, that's our problem, that's our issue. You know, and the fact is that the notion of enlightened self-interest that some of this taps into, not denying what's so crushing and bleak, but saying there may be a way here, that gets you buy-in in this free and open society. All of them are the same that way. Madison is right in Federalist 51. Self-interest counteracting self-interest. That's the way it works. But if you can do this, you can tap that beautiful E word, enlightened self-interest, where we deal with the bigger issues of not just me versus you, but sustainability, a shared future. What does that look like up ahead? And I have had beautiful response. We have, my wife and I, it's lovely. You know, I see Brian Williams in the hallway at NBC. I did some Chris Matthews thing on the CIA and the Senate, God knows what. But then I see Williams. He read the Times piece. Immediately he gets it. I think we're on either tonight or tomorrow night on the nightly news with Brian Williams. He's like, this is unleashing the discarded. And we discard more and more out of fear. It's a narrow pathway to that golden ticket of McKinsey and Goldman Sachs or whatever you're dreaming about. And so many are saying, out of here, that way. We can't survive that way. But this is reversing it. This is what takes us to the moon and Mars and beyond. This is unleashing human capacity. That's very hopeful. And so what I'm saying to people at institutions around the country, I was at Duke the other night, I'm going to others, find a piece of this. There are many parts of this. Affinity as pathway rather than prison. Be like them, not like you. Look at it through what Proust would call these new eyes. Figure out the mechanisms that are driving what is a reward circuitry that we have felt, and you know it's there. And that's everything. Don't turn it into a bludgeon. They're smarter than that. They know it. They know the game. They just want to get in here and enjoy it because they're going to pull the rug out from under me. This is who they are. And eventually, you'll start speaking map and anime, just like I speak Disney. And everyone will. And we'll even get a yardstick, a nice, clean, new one, to say, this kid has enormous capabilities in this way. And maybe we'll throw away what I call the bent yardstick of the meritocracy, the one that had Cedric Jennings discarded too. The problem is when you gold-plate a yardstick, it's tough to throw it out. Well, I think it's time we chucked it for our own good. So now I'm like preaching. This is very uncomfortable. Thank you for coming out tonight.